My name's Rich Martin. Many of you have heard from me. Thanks for your patience with me. I'd like to introduce Jolyn Czerniecki. Jolyn came aboard about a little over 2 years ago. She's been wonderful. Many of you have heard from her, and I've never had a chance to formally introduce her. She's a great help with a lot of things. She wrote this entire PowerPoint presentation. We're lucky enough to have Susan Payne here, our executive director. So she started with Burlington County, I believe, in 1989. Not to date her or anything. I'm older than her, so I can say that. And I think in 2005, she ran the Burlington County program, and I was I've known her since then. I think she started as our executive director in 2005. And I did the math with my calculator. I think it's 33 years she's been involved in farmland preservation. Sorry, Susan.
Thanks, Rick.
I don't know of anybody, or you'd be hard pressed to find anybody that's done more for farmland preservation. So we're very lucky to have her here today.
Good morning, everyone. We are very happy to be back in person and see you all. I'm a big believer in personal contact and face-to-face communications. I know a lot of you have traveled a long distance to get here. I don't know that every year we will do this in person, but until we get this room properly equipped with cameras and microphones and recording devices and all that, we thought this was a great idea for this year. And plus, you've been cooped up in your offices for a couple years, so we figured if there was one year to ask you to come in person, it would be this year. So welcome. Lots of new things, new building. We just moved here officially, opened the doors in January of this year. COVID hit. We actually had to move our offices from that old building that's now been taken down over on Warren Street here during COVID. So that was an adventure. But of course, my incredibly competent staff did an amazing job moving us and getting us into this new building. We would welcome you to come up and visit us on the 3rd floor. We have some really great offices. You can look out over the Delaware River. And in this building, it doesn't rain on the inside like the old building. So that's been a vast improvement. I have not seen the office temperature exceed 80 degrees like it used to in the old building. So we're very happy to be here, and we're very happy to be hosting you. Rich introduced Jolyn. She's been an outstanding addition to our staff. We are delighted to have her on board. And I want to thank them both for rewriting the handbook, making it much more user-friendly, hopefully, for you all, and interesting to read, and for putting on this conference. So a lot of work has gone into preparing for today. So thank you to both of you. And I always say this at the conferences. I mean, I haven't seen you all since 2016, so it's been a while. So I want to thank you for what you do. Farmland preservation takes a lot to accomplish. Landowners and counties and nonprofits, county commissioners, local officials, everybody does so much work to get an application from the beginning to the end. Surveyors, title work, right? Attorneys, my staff, SADC members, County Ag Development Board members. So it's incredible combination of people and talent that it takes to get a farm to closing. And but what we do, none of what we do happens without you. And we need good appraisers, and we need a good report, and we need a good review process. And that's really what we've been trying to build here. We all want to make deals happen, and at the same time, we are always cognizant of the fact that every transaction we do could wind up on the front page of the Newark Star Ledger, and we have to be answerable to the taxpayers for every penny we spend. And so that's why we scrutinize everything that comes before us. And that whole process just leads to integrity, right? And that leads to public trust. So that's really where we're coming from. I'd love to, oftentimes there's a deal, I just want to get it done, and man, we wish that value was higher. But at the end of the day, these guys, they're charged with protecting the public fisc. And that's why they do the review they do on the reports we get. So I just want to thank you for your work, for your responsiveness, and for the good products that you produce. And that's really the foundation of our program. We don't get anywhere without good appraisal reports to make a deal. So let me give you a little bit of snapshot of some hot items and what's going on in farmland preservation. The program will turn 40 years old next year. I haven't been with the program quite that long, but I've been there since most of the beginning. And one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to was we were honored in 2020 by American Farmland Trust. American Farmland Trust is a nonprofit organization solely dedicated to protecting farmland across the country. And so they analyze and work with really every state in the nation that has a program. And they did a report called Farms Under Threat, the State of the States, and they evaluated how every state was doing, on a whole list of criteria. And we were very honored to be ranked #1 in the country for the farmland preservation program that's been created. That's an extraordinary honor. And they recognized certain aspects of our program, not the least of which is we've spent more money on farmland preservation than any state in the country. But also, so that level of public investment, right, is big. But also they acknowledge the fact that our program requires counties and municipalities both to adopt comprehensive farmland preservation plans in their land use planning, right? That doesn't happen very often across the country. And so it's kind of like the DNA of farmland preservation is what those plans say. So we were recognized for that. And of course, designation of agricultural development areas or ADAs. ADAs are areas designated by the counties that are where agriculture is the preferred use of the land. And really it creates these large contiguous areas in most of the state of agricultural land. And we're trying to protect these large blocks, right? Because the biggest thing driving farms, one of the big things driving farms out of business is neighbors that don't understand farming, right? And the right to farm conflicts that create. So we really whenever we can, we try to, have contiguous blocks of farms because the best neighbor for a farm is another farm, right? They understand each other. And of course, farmland assessment. There wouldn't be any agriculture in New Jersey without farmland assessment. So I think that's a reflection of what we've accomplished, but we don't want to rest on our laurels. We're going to be 40 years old. I think trends and things that we were battling early in the program have changed, right? And so we're going to take this year, talk to our partners, talk to consultants, talk to anybody who will talk to us, and ask ourselves, what do we want the next 40 years of farmland preservation to look like? Because we want to get this job done. One thing I'll say also, we're first in the nation for farmland preservation, but we also ranked, according to AFT, 3rd in the nation for threat to remaining farmland, right? So, but we're in a really great place to do something about it. So where we are so far is we've preserved, as of last month, 2,774 farms. That's the 3rd highest number of farms preserved in any state in the country. We've preserved just under 242,000 acres. That's 4th in the nation. I mean, considering the size of our state compared to California and Colorado and Florida, right? These are extraordinary statistics for us to have accomplished this. And 1 out of every 3 acres of farmland in New Jersey is preserved, which is definitely the highest percentage in the country. So when the farmland preservation program sneezes, agriculture catches a cold, right? The policies that we implement here have a profound impact on the ag industry. So we're very sensitive to that. And of course, $1.8 billion of investment at the county, municipal, and state level, which is by far the #1 rank in the nation. So this is not some small little state program. We are on the map quite literally at the national level. Our program is looked to from other states for advice, for experience, for, gee, if you had to do it over again, how would you do it? So your contributions, what have we been through? We've been through the Pinelands, a Pinelands formula, the Highlands, dual appraisal, right? These are tools that almost no other state in the country does anything like this. And so we are where the experiments happen and where we prove, things that can work. So you're part of that. And all the people that I noted earlier are part of that. So we've accomplished a lot. I think we're about halfway to where we want to be. We've, I said preserved about 242,000 acres. I think we have about another 200,000 acres to go. The counties and townships, when you take all of their comprehensive plans and you take them together, there's about 180,000 acres that they have targeted for farmland preservation. And that doesn't even include what the state itself is targeting. So roughly 200,000 acres. So we still have a ways to go. Some of the new dynamics on the ground, some of the quote bad news, if I'll put it that way. So solar is a big issue, right? I don't know how much you're all reading about that, but in 2021, the legislature passed and the governor signed new solar legislation, really totally updating the state's solar strategy. The state's getting very aggressive in wanting to achieve its climate goals and its renewable energy goals. And a big piece of that is going to be solar. Hopefully a big piece of that is wind. Because solar is great, but if you're going to do it at an industrial scale, farmland preservation or farmland comes right into the, to the crosshairs. Farmland is the easiest place to build solar. It's flat, it's open, it's not a wetland, it's not forested, it's not, right? So that's where the developers want to go. So the legislation that got passed put caps on how much solar could be developed on good soil within each county's ADA, right? And so I thought farmland preservation was complex. I've gotten a front seat on solar regulation in the industry. That's incredibly complex, but you should know that as solar starts to emerge, right now, the statute has a lid. No county can lose more than 5% of the prime and statewide important soils within its ADA. That's a hard cap, statutory cap. That'll last for about 5 years, and then they're going to reevaluate. So that's going to be interesting to see how that plays out. Solar is allowed on preserved land to a very limited extent. So you're not going to see grid supply solar development on preserved farmland. That's prohibited. On a preserved farm, a landowner's able to build solar or wind renewable energy either to consume 1% of the farm. So if you had 100 acres, you could build an acre, or to meet 110% of the farm's energy demand, right? So we've been doing that for over 10 years now. And really farmers come in and apply to put solar to serve their farm. That's what's happening. You're not going to see industrial scale on preserved farms, if I have anything to say about it. That said, the parallel thing going on is this whole idea of dual use or agrivoltaics, they call it. The solar industry for a long time has been saying that, hey, solar's great. You can farm under the solar panels. Just put some sheep out there. We don't really consider that legitimate agricultural use of the land, which is why it's not allowed on preserved farms. There's a pilot program going on, parallel to the grid supply program I just described. And Rutgers University, and probably some of the other universities in the state, are working to really understand technology of deploying solar on working farms to understand, well, what kind of farming can you do under solar panels? How high do the solar panels have to be? Are they tilted? Do they track the sun? Are they vertical? One really intriguing model we saw was solar panels that really literally look like fences. They're just standing straight up. They're about 5 feet tall. Solar panels on both sides. So there's all kinds of technology that's being explored across the world to see how we can have farmland and working productive agriculture compatible with solar arrays. Because what we don't want to see is, a highly profitable vegetable farm or whatever, just kind of say, let's call it a day, put solar panels up and put some sheep out there. That's not good for the industry of agriculture. But with climate change and heat intensifying, there may actually be crops, perhaps cranberries, perhaps vineyards, that would benefit from having some of the crop area covered for part of the day so that the berries don't get scorched, right? So these kinds of things are what Rutgers is studying in detail. And over the next few years, we're going to see pilots and evaluate what's the agricultural impact of having solar on farms. Is that viable in the future? Should it be allowed on preserved farmland? Right? So those questions are coming down the pike. But right now we're sort of in an experiment posture. So we'll see what happens and what you see on the ground in terms of land transactions for solar and how that's going to affect the appraisal process. We're just starting to have that discussion internally. I'm sure there will be more guidance on that as that plays out. Of course, the warehousing boom, you know, we've been hearing a lot about that. You probably all know 10 times more about that than I do. You know, that certainly is surging in certain areas and taking productive agricultural land off the boards. Most of the farmland that we preserve is not zoned for those kinds of things. I think that's a pretty localized threat. I don't really consider that a widespread threat, whereas solar really could be a widespread threat. And then, of course, affordable housing settlements, right? Since COA disbanded and they gave it all back to the courts, we've seen this rapid increase in affordable housing settlements that are definitely having an impact, you know, throughout the state. So there's a lot going on out there, and we leave it to you to be paying attention to it and really communicating those impacts through your reports. And I think I'm going to stop there. I mean, those are the threats. The good news is we have funding. The program gets about $80 to $85 million a year for farmland preservation alone. We have a robust partner network of our counties, municipalities, nonprofits, federal partners, Highlands, Pinelands. I mean, we have lots of partners to get this job done, right? And I think with this, the 40th anniversary coming around, we're going to take a hard look at the program, see what could be better. We're all ears. If you all have suggestions on things you think would make the farmland preservation program better, we'd love to hear it. So with that, I'm not going to take any more of your time. I know you have a big schedule to get through. Good luck today. Have a successful conference, and we'll be seeing you all soon.
Thank you, Susan.
So we're going to briefly go through the agenda. We're going to run a Rutgers tribute, agricultural tribute video. I think it's about 11 minutes. A lot of nice agricultural scenes. You may see farms that you've appraised. There's some tributes to people that passed, unfortunately, but it's a very nice tribute to New Jersey agriculture. Jolyn's going to go over to the major changes in the appraisal handbook. So you got that. It's also on our website. We're going to go over the appraisal order checklist. That's the instruction to the appraiser. Many of you have seen that and they're dealing with it. And we'll go over that quickly and some things you should watch out for, especially things that aren't mentioned on the appraisal order checklist that we don't know about. Get back to your clients if there's something unusual that's not on there. We're going to go over the top 10 list, do's and don'ts. It's mainly don'ts, just to give you an idea of what problems we're seeing in appraisals, and hopefully we can, if you could clean those up, you don't have all that time and money associated with handling review questions. So hopefully that helps you. We're going to go over exception areas and residential opportunities. The new handbook has a lot of that information. You should read that. It's always been a misunderstanding. A lot of people are handling it just fine, but there's some confusion regarding exceptions and residential opportunities. They're two separate concepts. Sometimes they overlap, but we're going to go over that. Appraising farms with PDCs, Pineland development credits. Not all of you work in the Pinelands. We are expanding our Pinelands guidance on the website, and there's certain rules when doing those appraisals, and we have certain appraisers that have been working on those and doing an excellent job. Website changes. Jolyn came and she's technically savvy. So there's a bunch of things that I couldn't do when I was a one-man band. And I say, hey, why don't we put this, what can we do for the appraisers? For example, why don't we put before and after sales on there? And she just gets it done, like the next day it's done. Go to our website. You might want to look at some of all the sales before you even do an assignment. We want you to find nicer, newer sales. But we're sharing that information with you, so visit that site.
Okay, we're gonna go through these very quickly. The first few, I just want to touch on. We have a new layout. I think in the past, what was happening with the handbook was that different things had been added on, and so it's had a bit of a disjointed presentation. We've redesigned this so that it reads more like a beginning, a middle, and an end, and it mirrors the format of an actual appraisal, with each section of the appraisal described so that you know what your expectations are. So that's one of the big differences. Data motion, most of you already know that data motion has been replaced with Move It. It's really just a data transfer site when you're submitting your reports to us. Rather than emailing them or using data motion, we're using Move It. Move It's very user friendly, and most of you have already done it, and it's a seamless process. And if you haven't, I can assign you a user ID. So when it's time for you to submit your appraisals, you can just reach out to me and I'll make sure that you're all set up with that. We have a new requirement for comparable sales, and that is that you must have a minimum of four, a minimum of four. And the reason for that is sometimes we see appraisals that have 3, and it's really not enough. So we love 5, really would love to see 5, but we're requiring 4. And the second part of that requirement is that 3 of them have to have occurred within the past 5 years. And the reason we say that is because we want to encourage you to use current data. We do recognize that, you know, the farm next door might be the perfect comp and it might have sold 6 years ago. So we're giving you that flexibility with that one sale if you need it to be a little bit older. But in general, we want to see some current sales in there. We've also changed the comparable active listing requirement. In the past, we had you give us a list of all the active farms, and we're kind of finding that that seems to be a needless task, and the point is being lost. But what we would like to see is at least 1 active listing, no more than 3. Don't give us a whole list of every single farm that's available for sale. But there might be the perfect comp that hasn't sold, it's listed for sale, and you want to, you want to put that in, not in your grid, but just give us some information about it. Please, we want to see just 1. But if there's 2 perfect ones or 3 perfect ones, then go ahead and give us 3. So at least 1, no more than 3. And there's information in the handbook that explains it. We would like to see some information about that. Don't just say, it's this farm, it's here, and it's listed for this price. Give us a little bit of background so that we can see. This is supposed to be the most relevant listing to your subject. So why is it relevant? Is it the same size? Is it the same tillable? What is it about it that makes it a relevant comp? So please explain that. Photo requirements for subject improvements and comparable sales. We now have requirements where we would like all of the subject improvements to be photographed and included in your report and labeled. The reason we do that, I'll show you an example later. The reason we do that is because it's very important for us to know exactly what improvements are on the farm, not only for today, but also for the future. We find that some issue might crop up in 5 years, and we can go back to the appraisal and see, oh yeah, that building was there. Well, that didn't just pop up out of nowhere. There's another issue, and I'll show you that later. So we need to see each of the improvements photographed, and try not to, you can give us a grouping if you want, but we want to see each one photographed and then labeled so that we know what they are. For the comparable sales, some of you are going to roll your eyes at this, but we need to see a photograph that you took of the farm. We're seeing a lot of Google photos. Those are great. You can put them in, aerial photos, go hog wild, but we have to see that you went by and you saw this farm and you took a picture of it. We're having some issues with that. One thing that we removed from the handbook was there was a Pinelands worksheet in here. We took it out. We didn't know that it was all that helpful, but it is available on the website. So if you do need it, you can access it there. We've added a section on hypothetical conditions and extraordinary assumptions. So you can read through, there's just some more detail about that. And these are topics that we're going to discuss in more detail later. We have a section called Other Appraisal Considerations, Guidelines, and Requirements. That's kind of like a catch-all category for things that we thought that needed more instruction. There's a new appraisal order checklist. It's probably not all that new for you guys, but we're going to go through it anyway because there's some things in there we need you to pay attention to. We have an added section for exception areas and residential opportunities, a very confusing topic. We have some calculation instructions, probably some eye rolling about that also. We have a new handbook checklist. That's something that looks like this. You should have gotten one in your handbook. We'll talk about that. And then we've also expanded the section for PDC instructions for the Pinelands. Okay, so the other appraisal consideration guidelines and requirements section in this handbook, totally brand new. The first part is review considerations. When Rich and I are reviewing the appraisals, we are concerned with completeness. Is there enough information in this appraisal? Is the information accurate? Is there enough of it? And is it relevant to this appraisal project? But more than that, we are also concerned with reasonableness. So you might put all this data together and then you might come up with a conclusion that might not really be very reasonable. And that's really what we're concerned with. And certain things could test that reasonableness, such as a recent sale of the subject. So if the subject recently sold, that could be your test of reasonableness. Okay, shared market data and independent value conclusions. We want you to share data. Rich and I have been there. We know, you research these sales, you confirm these sales, you do all this work for them, and then someone calls. Do you have any sales you can share with me? And you're sitting there saying, oh, I really worked really hard on that one. I don't want to give this one away, but we really would like for you to. And if there's no other testament to that, is the fact that we put the sales on the website. We have a list of befores and afters. We don't want you to share your values. We want you to do your own thinking. So share the sale, share the data all you want, but then do your own thinking. And this kind of means, okay, I come in at 11,000 an acre, and I call the other appraiser. Oh, where are you coming in at? You don't know that they're right. They might say, well, I'm coming in at 15,000 an acre. This is like cheating off of the person in math class that doesn't have the right answers. So please just do your own thinking, be confident in your own work product, and but help each other out, and that helps us. Okay, subject sales and listings. You've probably already heard from us about this. We at the SADC are very concerned with the subject having sold recently. For us, it is a test of the reasonableness. If the property sold for 10,000 an acre and you come in and tell us that it's worth 20,000 an acre, then that's going to send up a little red flag for us. So we want you to really pay attention to the subject sales and listings. And sometimes what happens is, we'll read in the appraisal that it sold at a big discount and therefore we decided not to use it. Okay, we understand that, but don't be so quick to throw them away. First of all, it's like a gift, right? It's kind of like your free comp and you can easily verify it because you're there with the owner anyway. But if it's sold at a discount, what could that discount be? 20%, 30%? It could be more, but let's just say it's only 20 or 30. If it's only 20 or 30%, then might that be your best comp, even though it did sell at a discount? If your other comps are being adjusted with 60, 70, 80% gross adjustments, it could be. This is all stuff that we just want you to consider. And if you decide that you don't want to use the subject sale, there's reasons why we don't. That's fine, but then just make sure that it's completely analyzed, that you give us all the information about it, why it's not comparable, why you decided not to use it, and just make sure that it's fully explained. Gross adjustments as a measure of the quality of a comparable sale. This kind of piggybacks on the previous slide. We are talking about calculating gross adjustments. That's what we do when we get the appraisals. We look at not just the net adjustments, but also the gross. And if something is 80, 90, 100% adjusted, is that really comparable? At what point does that mean that it's not even relevant and you shouldn't have used that sale? There might be something that's better. So, you know, be careful of over adjusting. You don't have to adjust for every category. And maybe you don't need to make as big of an adjustment as you think. This is all stuff that you just need to consider when you're doing your appraisal. Multiple lot applications. Okay, this is going to get a little tricky. We're going to show you a few examples of what you do when you have an application that has more than one lot. So this first example, and these are all real examples. This is a farm. It's 2 lots. They're both contiguous. I'm sure you've all seen that. This is our wetlands map. The red line is the exception area. Both of these offer road frontage. They could both be sold separately. How do you value them? You assume they are sold as one transaction to one buyer. That's how our program works. That might not necessarily be how you do it in the real world, but for our program, that's how we have to evaluate these things. This is a different example. We have, in this case, 3. It's actually 3 lots. 2 are contiguous on the east side of the road, and then the one on the west side is obviously non-contiguous, separated by the road. In this case, they all offer road frontage. They could all be sold separately. But you still assume that they're being sold to one buyer in one transaction. And in your appraisal order checklist, it's going to give you the total land area. Use the total land area. It doesn't matter that they're not contiguous. You might be inclined to value them separately. If you decide to do that, we recommend that you don't do it that way. But if you decide that you do that, you have to make sure that you consider what type of a discount that a buyer would be looking for buying all the 3 lots together. This one has 3 completely contiguous, non-contiguous lots, totally not even near each other. This is the same story. Even though they're not contiguous, you still assume that they're being sold to one buyer in one transaction. Again, use the total land area that's stated in the appraisal order checklist. The appraisal order checklist is not going to map out for you that, you know, this lot was 20 acres and this lot was 30 acres. That's okay. Use the total acreage. And again, if you decide that you want to value them separately, just make sure you're applying a bulk discount. This is kind of a little different because in this case, we have 4 contiguous lots. And in this particular example, this was subdivided to its maximum yield. So in this case, again, same thing. You're going to assume that they sell to one buyer in one transaction. But for a buyer buying the overall property, since it is 4 subdivided lots, maybe they would pay a premium for that. So these are all things that we want you to all just think about. We're not giving you any, hard concrete rules, but this is all stuff that we need you to consider. Okay, as is value. For farmland preservation, it is a requirement that the subject be appraised in the as-is condition. This is something that you might not really be used to if you're not really all that familiar with doing a lot of farmland work. And you might be working for a developer and a developer buys something contingent on it receiving approvals. In the farmland preservation program, we can't assume that. We can't assume that they're going to have approvals. We can't assume that they're going to get a variance. We just can't make those assumptions. So you have to do it in its as is condition. Now, what goes along with that is there's probably a lot of sales out there that are sold contingent on approvals. So you have to make sure that you're careful to adjust appropriately for that. Pre-existing non-agricultural uses. We have seen veterinary clinics, we have seen repair garages, we have seen dentists' offices. This should all be listed in your appraisal order checklist. If it is not, then we need you to contact your client and let them know that there is some non-agricultural use. And then the second part to that is we want you to make sure that this may or may not contribute to the underlying land value. So that's something that we want you to consider with non-agricultural uses. Professional inspection and owner interview. As I mentioned before about the photos, we need photos for all of the buildings. And I know that there's probably this inclination to, you know, it's a farm, I've seen 1,000 farms, I don't need to see another farm. But we really would like to see, you know, maybe you've seen it, but we're often not at the farm. So we need you as our boots on the ground to convey to us what is this farm. So take some pictures from the road, but you have to go on the farm. Don't do your whole inspection from the road. Get on the farm, few different places in the farm, different angles, and then again, all of the buildings, and then make sure those are labeled. For the owner interview, this is your captive audience, this is your time. Make sure that you're asking all of your questions of the owner. We're seeing sometimes not enough information, maybe not enough background. This is also your time to ask the owner, does he know of any farms that sold? They all know each other. All the farmers know each other, and they all know each other's business. So you can ask him and he's going to tell you, oh yeah, Farmer Jim down there, he just sold his farm for this much or the other thing. So get that information and then go take your pictures, investigate those sales. The other thing, make sure you ask them about if they've listed it before. They could have listed the farm for sale 2 years ago and then took it off the market, but it would be nice to know that. So anything that has to do with the farm, maybe it's, oh yeah, we recently put in some irrigation, and they can tell you all the piping. Or, oh yeah, we recently cleared 25 acres of woodlands. We just had that actually, where there was a farm in application and they just bought the farm, and 6 months after buying it, they cleared, I don't remember exactly how many, but let's just say it was 20 acres. They cleared 20 acres of woodlands. So that affected their tillable acreage and improved the farm. So these are all things that you want to make sure that you remember to ask. Okay, here's the example. We got an appraisal, and in the appraisal, it had this picture. Here's my thingy. It had this picture here of this building, and it was labeled ag, labor, housing. And we looked at that and we said, oh, that's interesting, because it didn't say it in the appraisal order checklist. We didn't know anything about it. And that's because it wasn't in the application. The landowner didn't tell us anything about it. And from our mapping, this is our mapping here. This building, as you can see from here, the building, which is very substantial, I think it sleeps 50 people. The building is on the property border. So our mapping here, the green line actually covers the building. So when we saw our map, we couldn't see it. The landowner never told us anything about it. It was on the border, so it was kind of like, well, does it belong to this farm or does it belong to this farm? We were completely confused. We had to go back to the property owner and ask him. He goes, yeah, I do have that ag labor building that sleeps 50 people. We can't tell you how important you guys are to us, because without this picture, we wouldn't have known that that building existed. And it's not necessarily that the farmers are trying to be deceitful, it's just deceitful or anything. They just, some things they just forget about, or, you know, the application process is very confusing. It's very overwhelming to a lot of them. So maybe they don't include this information just as a, you know, they just blank out. But this is what we expect you guys to include.
Once again, I went the wrong way.
Okay, think like the buyer, the typical buyer of a specific farm. This really speaks to what adjustment categories are relevant and the typical buyer for the area. Is the buyer of a farm in Salem County the same as the buyer of a farm in Somerset County? Probably not. Could be, but probably not. You know, a farmer in Salem County is looking for agricultural characteristics, a high quality farm. They're going to farm that land. But someone buying a farm in Somerset County is probably concerned with estate type characteristics. And let's say they're buying a restricted farm. That dwelling opportunity or lack thereof is going to make a big difference in a Somerset County farm and maybe not so much in Salem County. So these are things that we want you to think about. Again, we're not saying you should adjust more, you shouldn't adjust more. This is all stuff for you to consider, but we want you to think like the typical buyer. Likewise, what adjustment categories are relevant? You know, your standard tillable or prime soils might not be as important for a restricted farm in Somerset County where they're trying to buy an estate farm. You have to evaluate all this on a case-by-case basis. Existing easements, conservation easements, and other restrictions. This kind of goes with the as-is consideration that we were talking about. You cannot assume that you can get rid of these conservation easements. In this case, this blue area here is a conservation easement, and it's basically blocking any access to the rear of the farm. You have to consider these easements. You can't say to yourself, well, it's an extraordinary assumption that these easements don't exist, and therefore I can put in 20 lots because you can run a road in back here. You can't do that. You have to assume that those existing conservation easements, if they're in place, and you can't do anything about them.
So in the new handbook, we emphasize the importance of the appraisal order checklist. I'm just going to show you some things to look out for. Again, one of the most important things is you are our eyes. We are not going to be out on the farm. Sometimes we visit a farm in a meeting or something, but for the most part, we're not there. If you see something that's not on this checklist, let us know. It's real important for a lot of reasons. Stewardship looks after these farms after they're preserved, and they go out there and they see a building that we knew nothing about, and they're wondering, how did that building get there? Why is there a Wawa in the middle of this farm? So you gotta be our eyes. So if something's not in here, let the client know, and that way you don't have to handle the change of the appraisal later when it gets discovered by the other appraiser. So this is the first page. It just has a bunch of information, block and lots, municipality, county, the SADC number, the owner's name, maybe a contact information. This tells you what type of program it is. There's nonprofit programs, direct easements are through us, county, municipal, and one of these will be checked. This is a very important page. This has the acreage of the farm, and this is your instruction to use this acreage. If you see something that's completely different than these acreages, let your client know. But for the most part, use these acreages. Don't change them. The property is going to be surveyed. We certify per acre rates. It's going to be surveyed, and the exact acreage is going to come later. But we'd like you to use these numbers in the appraisal order checklist. So this is a little unusual. This has a whole bunch of categories. This doesn't always happen. This is your gross acreage. In this case, there's tidelands. Tidelands are basically state-owned land now. There's border water, and sometimes there's a deduction on the land size. In this case, this becomes your real gross acreage for the appraisal report. So we want to see this gross acreage in the grid charts. You're always valuing the gross acreage. We'll get into that to get a per acre rate, and then that rate is applied to the net area. This is the exception area. This is a huge exception, very unusual. And this is our net area that the rates are going to be applied to. But it's important for you to use these acreages. They won't be this complex most of the time. If you have any questions on something like this, feel free to reach out to us. By the way, we like when partners use red, so it's the important information jumps out from the boilerplate. Just I don't know if you have any partners here or not. Date of value, whether it's a specific date that both appraisers are going to use or a date of inspection. Most of the time, I think it's date of inspection. Summary of dwelling opportunities. This was a big problem. How do I count up all my dwelling opportunities? They're listed throughout the AOC. So we decided to put in a summary, and it's working real well. There are different types of dwelling opportunities. This one had, I believe, an existing house in the proposed easement area. And so it had a total of 1 dwelling opportunity. So it would be totaled up. This could be 5, and they'd all be listed up here. So that's a very important thing. Make sure that you have the right number. This is an after value consideration when you're comparing your farm to comparable sales. Your comparable has 1 dwelling opportunity, your subject has 5, and that would be an upward adjustment to the underlying land. Not a before consideration. In the before, it can be built out at its highest and best use, maybe a ton of lots, who knows. These are our housing in the proposed easement area. Looks like there's 1 in this case, 1 in the proposed easement area. In other words, it's not on an exception. It might have been from this one, so I think that's that one. Mm-hmm. But again, they're summarized here. Then we talk about the exceptions. It's important for you to read these. This had a 1 acre exception. It's non-severable. Sometimes there's other things that you want to talk about. This exception will be restricted to 0 single-family residential units. So an exception is different than a dwelling opportunity. Not all exceptions have dwelling opportunities. So this one is for future flexibility for the owner. That 1 acre doesn't get the deed of easement, and it gives them some flexibility to go to the town, but we have restricted it. You can't do a house there. This one had non-agricultural unit, a restaurant building, and some solar panels. We like to know what non-agricultural uses are on the farm. If you find any that we're not listing, list them. It helps us with stewardship later. A restaurant may add to the underlying land value, but it gives you some information. Here's a 30.4 acre exception. It's severable. That means it can be subdivided at a future date if they get approval. We don't guarantee subdivision. Severables are not subdivided. You're valuing the gross land, and it's a potential for a lot. They have to, it's not subdivided yet, so don't treat it as a individual subdivided lot. Treat it as potential to your land. This was all wetlands, by the way, so it was kind of an interesting large exception, kind of unusual, but it could be severed in the future. So sometimes farms have approvals. We list them here. This one had approvals, preliminary date of approval, final date of approval. Some of the approval, again, we're valuing as is. The approval still exists, and you can value it with the approvals. Sometimes the approvals have expired, and the approval involved a bunch of variances. So sometimes we'll say, be careful with this approval. Don't carry the approval doesn't carry. You really shouldn't look at that. You want to look at it as current, its current zoning and what could go there. And the former approval may not be something you can consider. It might have information mapping that helps you in some regard. I hate to say you can't look at it, but sometimes we'll note here, be careful using the formal approval because it no longer exists or it's a pie in the sky now. Existing easements, we try to list the major ones. This had a conservation easement. If there's an easement that we don't know about that's significant, please let us know. We'd like to know about it. We'd like to tell the other appraiser about it. Again, you can't ignore easements. They're on the property in the before and after. They need to be considered. You don't have to worry about every little small utility easement that goes electric line to a house or something like that. But major easements, we try to list them here. And if you see any that we didn't list, let us know. Pinelands, it tells you if your farm's in the Pinelands. Pinelands farms often involve pineland development credits. This was a blueberry farm. There's slightly different requirements in the Pinelands, but the AOC will tell you most of them are not in the Pinelands, obviously, but it'll tell you. Transfer of development rights, that could be a number of things. In this case, it's PDC, so it is Pinelands. We tell you exactly how much the farm qualifies for, how much are being relinquished in the after situation, and how many will be left with the property. By the way, 0.5 PDCs is 2 rights, 2 dwelling opportunities in the after that they've retained. Maybe they're for existing houses. Maybe they want to retain a couple for future houses. But that'll be on an LOI that's given to you if you do a Pinelands report. And there's other areas that sometimes have TDR programs. Highlands, for example, there's no activity in the TDR program, but it has HDCs, but there's no market for it right now. Zoning, this is really important. This one, agricultural zoning, we think it's a 10-acre minimum. Read this over here. Appraiser should always confirm zoning and report the discrepancies to client immediately. Zoning changes all the time. We could be wrong. They're very important to us to report back to us when we have something wrong. Dual eligible is a Highlands thing. Certain farms in the Highlands have 2 different value scenarios. It would be checked here, yes, if it was in the Highlands, and it would check whether it's in the preservation or planning. This was not. Category 1 streams. Does that have a category 1 stream? 300-foot buffers on either side of the stream. That's a football field without the end zones. 2 of them on either side of the stream. They can be important in the before situation. Remember that existing crop fields within the buffer can still be farmed. Existing houses are grandfathered in. In the after, it might not be a big deal. You can still farm it if it's tillable. If it's not tillable, you might have trouble clearing it. But anyway, this tells you if there's a category 1 stream. AIL funding. AIL funding is a federal program for preservation. What you should know about this, if your property has AIL funding, there's a little more stricter deed of easement. We have a comparison chart on the website. We recently had an appraiser adjust for it. It could be adjust if you have a comparable sale that has a standard deed of easement and you think that the AIL deed of easement is strict enough that you want to adjust a little bit in property rights. This is something we should start to think about. They are more restrictive deeds. Some areas, they may not be any different than a right to a buyer. Some areas, they may be significant. For instance, Cumberland County has a lot of nurseries, and they have a lot of restrictions on removing soil, fall and burlap situations. Conditions, this had AIL funding, but read these boxes and this could save you a world of hurt. We might have a hypothetical condition we listed here. Sometimes we give you some information here that might be really helpful to your appraisal, Pinelands and stuff like that. But don't forget to read this stuff also.
All right, we're going to talk about the top 10, our top 10 list. This is the do's and don'ts portion of the program. When we were designing this conference, we wanted it to be more instructional, and that's kind of a lot of what the handbook was for. We just, as I mentioned before, our job is to help you guys, and we want to see you succeed. We want to make sure that you guys are not bogged down with reviews. Like who hates that more? I mean, come on. You think the job is out the door, and then the review comes back, and it's like, oh, brother. So we're trying to help you avoid that part. So that's why we, boosted the handbook a little bit. And these top 10 things are stuff that we see that we would really maybe rather not see. So we did have a little, I have to admit, we had a little technical difficulty before. And so we lost, like all of these were supposed to come in one at a time, but we had to make some changes. So it's not as exciting, but this is a nod to David Letterman when he used to do the top 10 list. And he would start with number 10. So, thank you, David Letterman. So number 10 is no surprises. And what we mean by no surprises is whatever information you have in your adjustment grid should also be explained in your sale write-up. What we see a lot is in the adjustment grid, it'll say that it's 25% prime soils. And then we go to look in the write-up, and the write-up has no soils information. So where did that 25% come from? Surprise. So let's not have any surprises. Number 9 is comparable sales maps. And I'll show you an example in a minute, but comparable sales maps, you can have one map that has all of your before and your after, or you can have a map for your before and a map for your after. But what we're really wanting to see is a map that has the subject and all of the sales on it at one time, because we want to see where are these comps in relation to the subject. You are free to put as many maps in there as you want, but we have to see at least that. Number 9 is adjustment errors and reasoning. We are all human. We all make mistakes, but really try to take an extra look at your set of adjustments, because if you make, say, a 10% adjustment that's negative, but it should have been positive, now that's a 20% swing, and that's probably going to affect your value conclusion. So just be careful of that. The reasoning portion is what we see a lot of is, the sale was inferior and therefore it was adjusted upward. But remember, we don't really know what that is. So please explain to us. This sale was adjusted upward because this, that, or the other thing. So just try to give us a little bit more reasoning rather than it's inferior. If you're adjusting upward, we're assuming it's inferior. So we need a little bit more. Number 7 is dated sales. Please try to be current with your sales. That's kind of why we put the limit on there for the 5-year rule. Markets change, buyers change. We are seeing some different trends. We'll talk about that later. So try to use as current information as you can. And we do give you sales, so that's a great resource if you're having trouble finding stuff. And then that goes to the stingy appraiser. And we spoke about that a little earlier. Please just share with everybody. You don't have to use whatever the other appraiser gives you. The other appraiser might not have as good a stuff as you have, but please just share with each other. Government sales. Perfectly fine to use government sales. Just try not to use so many of them. Because the government sales tend to, we don't want the government to be the market maker. We would like to see, government sales are great because they're easy to verify. So you might have appraised them, so they're good to throw in. You can have 1 or 2, but try not to have any more than that, because we want to make sure we're using real market data. Proofreading. This kind of goes back to number 8. Just try to really proofread your reports. Some of these things seem, we all use a previous report as a basis for the current report. And there might be some text in there that's left over. And oftentimes it's fairly benign. But sometimes there's something in there that says, oh, well, given its location next to the sewer plant, blah, blah, blah. And then we look at it and say, what is next to a sewer plant? We didn't know anything about that. So when we're reading it, please understand that, you know, that is our first time learning about the property. So it's important to try to proofread and get that stuff out of there. Okay, who let the dogs out? Who wrote these slides? Was that you?
It's all you.
That is a very old bad song, Who Let the Dogs Out. But what we mean by that is get out the old dog sales. We all have them. We all know what they are. Maybe it's the really high value. Maybe it's the really low value. Maybe it's far away. But whatever it is, get rid of it. Maybe you put it in because you just need a fifth sale. We're only requiring 4. We would rather see 4 good ones than 4 good ones plus 1 dog. And oftentimes what we see happens too is that you'll throw in this dog and then equal weight is given to all sales. And then now this dog has now skewed things. So you don't need them. Just, you know, try to give us the best quality you can. Over adjustments and exception to the rule. We spoke about over adjustments a little earlier when we were talking about gross adjustments. Some things might not have to be as adjusted as you think. There is an exception to the rule, and that is size. We find there is a huge difference when you have a small farm versus a large farm. And when I say small, I mean like anything less than 30 acres or so. The price per acre of a 30-acre farm is usually much higher than it is for a larger farm. And if you happen to be using those size swings, you want to make sure that you're adjusting appropriately. Sometimes we're seeing like very modest adjustments, and those might need, you know, you might need to be tweaking those up or down a little bit more. And the last thing is subject sales and listings. This is our number 1. I was supposed to do some sort of drum roll that David Letterman does. Subject sales and listings is our number 1 thing that we want you to pay attention to. And we did speak about it earlier. I don't know if any of you are using this, but realtor.com is a really good website. It gives you a history. It'll say, you know, it's an actual timeline. It was listed for sale on this day. It expired on this day. It was listed for this at this price. And so if you're looking for a history of your subject, maybe the landowner didn't tell you about it. Maybe he forgot. Maybe you forgot to ask. Try realtor.com. And actually what you can do is just type in the address of your property in Google, and often realtor.com will come up. The downfall with that is if it's just land and there's no like house or anything, it doesn't really take the address very well. So, but check realtor.com anyway. That's a really good resource. Okay, here's an example. Here is a map that is perfectly acceptable to show where the sale is. It's blown up. It shows me some good detail, but it's not a substitute for a comparable sales map. You can throw this in to show me where it is. But instead of this, how about this? This map shows not only the subject, but then it also shows all of the sales in one spot. So I can see where everything is in relation to that. So when we talk about a map, that's what we're talking about. And I can show you how to do this for free. You don't have to have a mapping program to do it. There are free websites, and I will show you that later.
So let's see if we can confuse the heck out of you. Exception areas and residential opportunities. I'm going to try to make it a little simpler. It may seem confusing, but we're going to try to make it a little simpler. Remember that these are 2 different concepts. An exception may not have a dwelling opportunity. A dwelling opportunity exception is a specific area of farm that is exempt from the farmland restrictions, and therefore it's excluded from the gross area. We take it off to calculate the net area because we don't pay on those exceptions, but that's an area where the owner has some flexibility. They wanted an exception, or uses, other uses that they might be able to get in the future, or a current use, but they could go to the town and try to get some uses on that area that are not allowed on the deed of easement area. But it's an area we don't pay on, but it doesn't always have a dwelling opportunity. The idea here is that these are two different concepts. Residential opportunity is any opportunity to live on a farm. It could be more than one. We showed you our summary of dwelling opportunities. There's all different types. It could be within an exception area, outside an exception area. It could be an existing house. It could be a future house. Now, these are after value considerations when you're comparing it to your comparable sales. In the before, you have the right to build this out anyway, highest and best use, but these are after value considerations, and they're slightly different. So I want you to be aware of that. Sometimes exceptions have dwelling opportunities, so there's some overlap, but keep in mind that they're different things. There's non-severable exceptions and severable exceptions. They often include residential opportunities, but not always. A severable exception area has potential to be subdivided and sold off in the future, pending approvals from the municipality. It's a right to go attempt a subdivision. It's not a subdivided lot yet, as of your date of value. It's a positive, we think. When you're making comparisons, you might be able to subdivide this. Your daughter could build a house on it, but they have to get approval from the town. Not an approved subdivision yet. They'll probably get it. The town will say, "Well, they preserved the farm," and we try to keep the severables within the lot minimums for that zone, by the way, so that they'll get approved. But it's a future opportunity. Non-severable exception can't be sold off. It's part of the farm. It's an area that doesn't have the deed of easement. It gives the owner some flexibility of use. Both of these are positives when you're thinking about your comparable sales and how to adjust them. But they're remember that exceptions and residential opportunities are slightly different concepts. So gross versus net area in both this is extremely important. This is where I'm trying to simplify life. In both the before and after, the gross land area and its characteristics are analyzed to determine a per acre rate. We certify the per acre rate. So in both situations, you're valuing the gross land. We want to see the gross land area in the grid charts. Usually the gross and net are fairly similar, but we want to see that. When we see gross land area in the grid charts, we know that you're doing it right. Sometimes there's a 30-acre exception. It could be a big difference, but you're valuing the gross land area to come up with a per acre rate. Once the per acre rate is determined, that gets applied to the net land area to calculate the total values. We don't pay on the exceptions. So this is a way to take the owners to request an exception. Our policy is we don't pay on it, so we will not. That won't be part of the compensation. So the total values don't include the exception. I hope everybody understands this, but the per acre rate is based on the gross land area. That's sort of kind of is the most important concept in this discussion. Before valuation, here's one. It is as if the exception areas do not exist. When you're valuing that, it's just an area we're not going to pay on. You're valuing the gross land area. Don't think about the exception as changing the shape, changing the frontage. You're valuing the gross land area. We're just not going to pay on that area, so it's taken out of the totals. So before it couldn't be easier. Just act like the exceptions don't exist to get a per acre rate, and then you apply it to the net area, which is really a way how we calculate compensation. In the after value, the subject and comparable sales, residential opportunities and exception areas must be considered when making adjustments. So this after valuation is based on the hypothetical condition that the deed of easement's in place. It includes the proposed exception areas any dwelling opportunities, but you're valuing the gross land area, including the exceptions, to get a per acre rate, and then you apply that per acre rate to the net area. Subject and comparable sale residential and exception areas must be considered when making adjustments. So they are part of the gross land. You're valuing the gross land to come up with the per acre rate. So they are, assume that those exceptions are part of the gross acreage in the locations that they're in. Make adjustments accordingly if you think they're a positive, but you're valuing the gross land area to get a per acre rate. So now we just have examples. These are our wetlands maps. A lot of you have seen these. The reds are exception areas. By the way, well, we'll get to it. This is a non-severable exception in the middle of a farm. Again, we value this like it's not there in the before. I'm not going to go over this much more, but in the after, it has an exception, but you're valuing the gross land. That exception may be a slight positive to the overall land value because it gives the owner some flexibility, but you can decide that. This is a severable exception. The owner would have the right to go for a subdivision. This one has a severable exception and a non-severable exception. These will be listed on your appraisal order checklist. I have some detail on these exceptions. By the way, again, refer to your appraisal order checklist, but ES on our mapping is a severable at the end. Jolyn circled these. EN is a non-severable. This one could be subdivided if they can get approvals. This one has to stay with the farm. It doesn't have the deed restrictions because it's non-severable. This is one with a 3 acre severable with an existing dwelling on the frontage here. This is one with a huge wetlands in the back. And it's severable. They could sell this off. This is one of our actual applications. Now, I shouldn't tell you this, but this much wetlands would throw off the overall gross value so much on a per acre basis that we had this value. We had this this area valued as though this wasn't with it. And the appraisers worked with us on that. We appreciate that. That's unusual. We will give you a special instruction, but in this case, we allowed this to be valued because the wetlands would just throw everything off. Again, 2 exceptions, a 3 acre severable exception, non-severable, I'm sorry, along the frontage. This was a 30 acre exception, non-severable. I think a county park or something was going to put an easement through here, or they're going to buy it later. I'm sorry, it's going to stay with the farm. But anyway, these exceptions come in and I don't think there's no residential opportunity. So again, exceptions don't always have residential opportunities. So here's one that looks like Coney Island, right? You got Nathan's Hot Dogs here. Again, 4 different exceptions. You know, the appraisal order will tell you whether they're severable. Now, these are all non-severable. They're out in the middle of the farm, so that makes sense. What dwelling opportunities? There's some farm labor housing. Don't panic. It looks crazy, but in the before, you're valuing the gross land area. By the way, I think this is in Colts Neck, and I think they built a cul-de-sac in here and put very expensive lots in the before. In the after, it has these exceptions, and you can decide whether it's worthy of adjustment in comparing it to your comparable sales. So different residential opportunities. A residential opportunity, be careful of the terms, is a generic term for any ability to reside on a farm. It could be in an exception or an easement area. It could be existing or future. RDSO, it's not residential dwelling site opportunity, which I say all the time, it's residual. But an RDSO is a future home on your subject property that has some restrictions. And the point is that it might be less value than other forms. It's a form of a residential opportunity, but it might be more restrictive. It's a future opportunity on the easement area. It's designed to enhance the ag operation of a farm. Generally, you need 100 acres, but you'll be told on your appraisal order checklist whether the subject has one. At least one resident must be actively involved in the farm operation. Again, you're supposed to be actively involved. Now, that could be an owner. They may have size restrictions. Most do not. So you got to be careful. You know, in some cases, you could build a substantial home. And in some markets, it might be almost similar to a regular dwelling opportunity. But you have to get approval from the SADC or the County Agricultural Development Board. Generally, they look down on 15,000 square foot houses. Even though there's not a size restriction, we're trying to promote affordability to farmers in the future on these, especially on an RDSO. You're supposed to be actively involved. And if you put a huge house there, nobody can, the average farmer can't afford it. Now, again, you have to decide, maybe tough beans, you can build a big house, but we've seen some of the real big ones get rejected. But we've seen where they come down to 6,000 square feet and got approved. That's a pretty nice house. So the idea here is an RDSO might be slightly less valuable. That's up to you guys. If you think it's same as your comparable sales that have a dwelling opportunity, that's your call. Different markets have different way to look at an RDSO. Existing house, it's not an RDSO. It could be in the easement area, exception area. There's generally no restrictions on occupancy, even if it is located on the easement area. I mean, you could rent it out. Not going to look after who's living there. It can be replaced with a future house with SADC approval. So you go out on a farm and you take pictures of all the improvements, and one of them is a dilapidated house. It's not listed on your appraisal order checklist. Let us know about that. We want to know about that. We want to decide whether that could be, somebody could rebuild that with a really nice home. This is one of the reasons why we like you out there. Remember, you're valuing land, so dwelling opportunities, you have to decide how much dwelling opportunities, whether they increase the value of the underlying land of the overall property. It could be fairly subtle when you think about the overall property. It's not the value of the actual house, but the right to do it when you're making comparisons in the after value to farms with a certain number of dwelling opportunities. If you're in Colts Neck and you have no dwelling opportunity, that could be very limiting to the average buyer in Colts Neck. You might not want to even use, if your subject has a dwelling opportunity, you may not even want to use sales that don't have, because they want to live in an estate property with a nice house. Anyway, other markets are different. More rural area might not be that big a deal. Again, this one, there's no exceptions. This one had an RDSO. That means in the future, they can go for approval to build a house. It's not specifically located. I will tell you that the approving authorities will want you to build a house in an area that does the least damage to the productive land. So if they can put it in an area near a wood line or that is a debate. They're not super restrictive, but they want to keep the productivity of the farm. So they might not want to right out in the middle of they might locate it where it does less damage to the productivity of the farm. By the way, on our website, we have now a list of all the preserved, most of the preserved farms in the program listed for you with some of the details. So if you find a comparable sale, you can go in there and see some of the details. Not all, some farms preserved in other programs won't be there, but that's a helpful thing on their website. You got to get to the website. This has a severable exception and an RDSO. The RDSO is right here. No, you could, they go to apply later and decide where they can get approval to build an RDSO, and this is a severable. I don't really, does it, oh, it has two dwelling opportunities. So that you could, this is designated as one where you could build a house. So therefore, this has two dwelling opportunities. This was a severable exception to allow the owner to sell a driveway to rear land. So this obviously is for a future driveway. It doesn't have any dwelling opportunities, no dwelling opportunities. It's just, so they come in different forms. This also had two existing houses on the easement area. This would be in your AOC. There's two houses in here. So when you're adjusting in the after, this has two dwelling opportunities. This is multiple residential opportunities within an exception area. This is a non-severable exception. There's two houses in this mess of buildings. Got to find those houses. See if they match the AOC. So point is, they residential opportunities can be on exceptions. They might not be. They're two different concepts that sometimes overlap. Multiple residential opportunities within a 5.1 acre non-severable exception area. It's in this area. There's one existing single family, one future single family opportunity, and one barn apartment. These would be listed, even the apartment should be listed in your summary and your AOC. And you can decide how that adds to value when you're adjusting. Okay, you probably can't see this. By the way, Jolyn did some really nice Excel grid charts and put them on the website. What was it? 4, 5, and 6 sales?
Yeah.
For before and after. If you want to grab those and use them, grab them and modify them to your needs. That's why they're there. The point of this particular exercise is usually residential opportunities and exceptions are one line item, but they are two different concepts. You actually could separate them if you wanted. You have another category. I love the other category. You all love the other category. Anything that's important to a buyer in the area, you could add something. But anyway, they list both. There's one residential opportunity on the subject and two exceptions. One residential opportunity and two exceptions. So the idea is there's no adjustments made here. We're just making the point that these are two different concepts. You could list them both and decide how to adjust these.
Okay, so you all have one of these in your office. You can feel free to use them. As if we have not driven the point home enough, totals are based on the net acreage, never on the gross. Your easement per acre value should be calculated by taking your before per acre minus your after per acre. Your easement total is not the totals subtracted. You should not use your before total minus your after total. What you should be doing is take your easement per acre times the net acreage. And then here we put in a little thing about rounding to the nearest 100 to answer your question. Suggested, but not required. If you want to have it as, not rounded, that's your business. Okay, this was a little bit more exciting when we were able to have the animations, so you'll just have to bear with me. In this example, we have appraiser 1, and he has his data value here, and he concluded to a before value of $9,100, an after value of $4,400. So by simple subtraction, the easement value becomes $4,900. That's not right.
Is that wrong?
That was a trick, wasn't it?
Trick question, making sure you're paying attention.
So you just reviewed the reviewers.
All right.
I made her change that and messed her all up.
Okay, so here's the point of the example. Your total calculations, and we're showing you this because I know, again, you're all rolling your eyes. We know how to calculate, but unfortunately, maybe not all of you do.
Wow. They come to your seminar and you abuse them.
No, I'm joking.
Who made the mistake.
And we have a mistake. And we got the error.
So, the point is, back to his question about rounding. 30.5 net acres, you're always using your net acreage. 30.5 times 4,900 should be 295. And if it's not, we're going to pretend it is. In this case, the appraiser said it's 295 for the before, 135 for the after, and then he came out to an easement value of 160. In this particular case, the appraiser really rounded to 5,000. Here are the actual numbers on this line. The actual was 293,880, 139,040, which is a big difference here. And presumably the appraiser decided to give the owner the benefit of the doubt and round down. And look at the difference in the easement value. 154,840 is the actual compared to 160. So
That's not proper rounding.
yeah, that's the point of the exercise, is that it's not necessarily when the appraiser rounds 5, or we see a lot of things here. So what we're saying is there could be substantial difference in your values if you do excessive rounding. So the point is, if you want to round, okay, but don't do excessive rounding. Here's an option, and this goes to our round to the nearest 100 option. So instead of 293,880, 293,900. Instead of 139,040, how about 139? And instead of 154,840, how about 154,800? You know, we're not going to nail you to the cross if you use, you know, the actual numbers. So you feel free to do that. Just watch the excessive rounding. And make sure you calculate correctly. This would be a bad idea here.
Remember, we certify, excuse me, Jolyn, the easement value, and the property will be surveyed, so we'll apply it to the net acreage. So always go with the net acreage times that easement value. We have a mistake here, sorry about that. But
Who made
Don't-
the slides?
don't over round and then subtract your totals. You could be way off. I'm sorry, Jolyn.
Okay.
My bad.
Okay, this is just a real quick recap. Totals are based on the net. Make sure you calculate your easement by before minus the after. The easement total is supposed to be your multiplication. It's okay if the subtraction doesn't work. So if you're doing this, you know, the easement per acre value times the net acreage, and then that's not calculating correctly, if you're doing your subtraction, that's okay, because you're doing it the way we say. Okay, this is Rich's turn. Market and value trends.
So this is where you have class participation. What's happening in the marketplace? What are we seeing? Down zoning is no new concept. The reason why I bring it up is a lot of towns have increased their minimum lot sizes, and it can really affect the feasibility of doing new interior streets in a subdivision. Here's a quick market study. I go to a town that I'm working in. I call up the town. I say, I'm working in the ag zone, has 3-acre zoning, and there's plenty of agricultural land in this town. Are any developers building on interior streets? No. The entire town, nobody's building on interior streets. My point is, Springfield Township in Burlington County is my neck of the woods. And when I started, it was 1 acre. It went to 3 acre. Now I think it's 10 acre. So very often it's not currently feasible to build on interior streets. In fact, a lot of our highest and best use in the before is agricultural use or interim agricultural use with eventual low density residential. But one of my points is some of our appraisers do a real nice job in a rural area of estimating the maximum lot yield. That's fine. That's fine. But you might want to tell the reader that's not really happening right now in some of these areas. A lot of the subdivision is based on existing frontage, and they're just doing it based on the frontage minimum, which is often lower density. Again, it's fine to say what's possible to yield, but just tell the reader that ain't happening right now. Now, if you go up to Monmouth County, the more expensive the area, by the way, the smaller the minimum lot size, they could have very active development. And they're maximizing the lot yield based on zoning, doing interior streets. New Jersey has, that's what's wonderful about having you all work in different areas. New Jersey is not, you can't plug it into a formula. I really like having appraisers that know each area. They're all different. All right, so how's the recent bidding war on single family homes affected the value of farms? We all know people that have tried to buy a home recently, and I bid 10,000 over asking and didn't get it. There were 27 bids. You know, so we see appreciation in existing homes. Significant appreciation. For the longest time, we hardly had time adjustments. Like after the drop in 2008, 2009, a lot of appraisers were not doing time adjustments at all. And now, if the highest and best use is single family, we see appreciation in good, certainly in good areas. But be careful on your time adjustment. If you're in a rural area where no developers are building homes, it's not feasible at this time. Take a look at your old appraisals and make sure that values are going up. Old comps, make sure values are going up before you assume that there's a 10% per year appreciation. Now, in an area with development pressure, more expensive areas, builders are building, houses are going up like crazy. That's going to affect the underlying land value, but just be careful of over adjusting for time. You might have an area that does need a significant appreciation adjustment. So what are these things that are growing out of cornfields? So I drive in from my South Jersey home and I go down Route 130. It parallels the Delaware River into beautiful downtown Trenton. And there's these huge warehouses going up all over the place. New Jersey is the warehouse capital of the world now. It's right on the Northeast corridor between Boston, New York, Philly. And if there's demand, they pay a lot of money for these properties. And historically, they located off of exits. Certainly, that's still preferable. Trucking costs right off the exit. Drive up the turnpike, Cranberry, you see these huge warehouses. And they're generally preferable on sites that have sewer and water. We have some self-storage here. Why do we have that again? No, self-storage doesn't involve, doesn't need sewer. So this is another use that could happen on a non-sewer site.
If you have not been on our website lately, you should go on our website because we've done a lot of work to it. So the first thing is we have redesigned it and it's easier to find. In the past, you couldn't even find the appraisal part of the website. So now there's a button, I'll show it to you in a second, really easy to find. The new handbook is on there. The handbook checklist, which is this thing that I showed you about, that's on there. There are adjustment grid templates. That's what Rich was talking about. In Excel format, there's a before, there's an after. You can help yourself to those if you need them. The sales are on there for before and after. We have this new list of SADC preserve farms. I'll get into that. We have some other links to helpful websites, AL instructions, and our contact info. This is what the website looks like. And in the past, it was not so simple, but now you should be able to, if you just Google New Jersey farmland preservation, this will come up and you go right here to the appraisal page. And this is what it looks like at the beginning. And these top things here are just little, like almost bookmarks. You could click on each of these and it'll jump you down to that topic in the website. And then there's a little one of these top buttons at each section. It'll bring you back to the top of the list. The very first part, this just has some information about how you can become an approved appraiser. Most of you in this room are already approved appraisers, so you know what that's like. We have the rules here for appraiser selection, retention, and removal. These, if you are interested in reading these, you can go to our New Jersey Administrative Code and you can brush up on that. We have a list of the approved appraisers. We, as you know, we reapprove appraisers once a year. We present our list to the SADC and they give us the green light, you're approved or what have you. Prior to that, I send out these very annoying emails, you know, please update your information, tell us if there's any changes, so on and so forth. It's important that you respond and give us any updated contact information, because it's very hard for us to keep track of all of you if you've changed jobs or changed locations or what have you. So please try to keep in contact with us. And then we also have a list of our review appraisers that are on there as well. Appraisal guidelines. This is the new handbook. As you see, the handbook checklist, the appraiser order checklist, all these things are there for you to, as resources. Here's where we keep the templates. There's one for the before and the after, and here's our farm list. When you are looking at the sales, the list of sales, remember that you have to do your own due diligence. These are really should just be looked at as leads. We don't do anything with these except put them on the list. So there might be information in there that's incorrect. If there is, you should let us know so that we can fix it. But you should be confirming these sales. The handbook checklist is brand new. This is this thing that we handed out. And basically what it's supposed to be is a summary of what's in here. Since we've put so many new requirements in here, we thought, you know, just on the off chance that you don't read this whole book cover to cover, that maybe we should give you a checklist. And it would be helpful for you to print this out. Maybe you want to do it each time you submit an appraisal. We do have a link on the website so you can print extra copies. But what it does, I don't know if you can see this, but you can look at it on here. The idea is this tells you what is required, and on the right-hand side, it tells you what page in the handbook. So if you don't quite understand what's expected of you, you can read about it. We, in the past, there have been things that maybe we, you know, didn't really care for in an appraisal, and we felt like we couldn't really go back and ask you to fix it because we didn't really have a concrete requirement about it. Now we have the requirement, so please make sure you read this and make sure you're following the requirements. We certainly did not go over everything. The list of SADC preserve farms, this is fairly new. I think we put it up here just a few months ago. Again, read this, and we're going to show you a sample of the list. I don't know that I would necessarily print it. It's very large. Maybe it's like 150 pages. It's all of our 2,700 preserve farms. And this list is not complete in the sense that if a county or a nonprofit organization preserved a farm without our involvement, then that would not be on our list. This you probably have difficulty reading also, but this is a sample of what that list looks like. It's really a great resource. If you're wondering if your comparable sale is preserved, check it out here. They're sorted by county, then by municipality, and then by block and lot. The block and lot is a little squirrely too, so make sure you just read carefully through all of them. It gives a lot of information here. It's not necessarily complete. The older the farm is, that data might not have gotten into the database very well. So here's some good information though. Percent of prime soil, statewide soils, tillable. It's really a good resource for you to check your own data. Here's a column that talks about the number of acres in the exception area and the residential opportunities. So Rich was talking about them being two different concepts. This number here, it has a 2. That refers to the number of acres. So in this example, it says 2 around house. This exception is non-severable. That means it's a 2-acre non-severable exception with a house. And then there's a second one, another 2-acre future house, and this exception is severable. There is also the block and lot here. The deed book and page. That is for the deed of easement. That's really, if you can get a hold of that, that's going to be your best check, because as you can see down here, we have a bit of an error. And Rich and I have no control over this. This is in our database from the inception of the program, and all of the employees that have worked here through the years who have been entering the data. This says 4.875, which again refers to the acreage, flexibility around the existing house. This exception is non-severable. And then for whatever reason, it repeats it several times. Obviously, that's incorrect, and we really don't have the power to fix that. Here is the column ALE. Rich was talking earlier about ALE funding. If your comp, if you're wondering, number one, is it preserved? Again, come here. If you're wondering if it had ALE funding, there should be a yes here if it did. So this is a resource for a bunch of reasons. So make sure you're checking this out. We have some helpful websites here, Web Soil Survey, GeoWeb. Come take a look here. This is all just to try to make your life easy, trying to put things in one-stop shopping for you. We have a Pinelands and Highlands section. This is really new. We just did this last week, where we have a link to the Pinelands Commission and then also the PDC Bank, so that you can see the transactions that have happened if you're doing work in the Pinelands. And then Highlands, we have a link to the Highlands Council as well as the Highlands Interactive Map. If you are appraising farms of PDCs, which means Pinelands Development Credits, the agricultural improvements outside the exception area must be valued. This includes irrigation piping, barns, fencing, wells, whatever is agricultural related. And this is in the handbook too. The PDCs need to be valued separately, hence the PDC Bank, which we put the link to that I just showed you. You want to go to that website to get your sales information for the PDCs. As I mentioned, there is a new section for Pinelands in the handbook. Here's the ALE part. We're still on the website, by the way. This is down at the bottom of the website. We have some ALE information. We have a new guidance document and a comparison chart. The comparison chart basically tells you the difference between ALE versus non-ALE. And then again, our contact information. Okay, before you leave, we are going to give you some free gifts, as if the handbook was not enough of a free gift. Free tools. NRCS Web Soil Survey. If you are not using this, you need to be, because this is how you're going to get your soils information for your comps. It is a requirement. It's in the handbook. It is a requirement that your sales all have soil information, how much prime, your septic compatibility. That's going to be obtained from this. This website is a little clunky, a little hard to use, a little, tricky. So we actually also have instructions on our website for how to use this. It's step-by-step, has screenshots in there. So if you're not using it, you can kind of walk your way through it. And if you have problems, you can call me and I'll help you. New Jersey Conservation Blueprint. This is something that the staff at SADC uses quite a bit. And this is a fabulous, fabulous website. It's free. If you don't use it, you really want to check it out. I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it, but I am going to show you some of the hot things that this does for you. And we do have instructions for this on the website also, because it can be a little tricky. Basically, what you're going to do is go to the agricultural tab. This is one of the many. I'm just going to show you real quickly some of the things that this website does. So it'll show you, it'll outline everything with block and lot, and then it has these colored overlays, and it can show you the different colors represent different, if it's preserved open space, if it's preserved farmland, if it's in application. So if you're wondering if that particular comp that you're looking for is preserved, or maybe it's an application to be preserved, this is a good resource. It also shows wetlands. It also shows Pinelands and Highlands. Now this part, the map has been zoomed way out, obviously, just because I wanted to show you, but you can kind of even see. So things are color coded for the Highlands as well as for the Pinelands. So this way you'll know if your property is in the planning area versus the preservation area and so forth. Streams and buffers. Remember, Rich was talking about the 300-foot buffer for Category 1 stream. On this particular website, it shows the Category 1 stream as this dark blue line. The little blue line around it is the 50-foot buffer, and the yellow is the 300-foot buffer. So again, if you have a stream on your comp or on your subject and you're wondering if it's Category 1, come to this website, and if it has the yellow, then you can tell it's a Category 1 stream. It also does soils. This is a great kind of a check for NRCS. It's not really a substitute for NRCS because all this will tell you is the percentage of prime or statewide, et cetera. It's not going to tell you each and every soil. And it is a requirement that your comps show the soils, but you can see them. You just can't tell how much there are. But this is a great check on the other one. Okay, here's the trick. If you use nothing about this website, this is something that you might want to use, and not even for farmland preservation. You could use this for all of your appraisals. They have these measurement tools. It'll measure distance as well as area. Are you wondering what your frontage is? You're trying to check to make sure that the tax map is correct. Are you trying to see how far the setback is for, from the road to your building? Are you trying to measure perhaps the distance of, I don't know, name any distance. This is very easy, and you click on the first point, you click on the second point, and it tells you exactly what it is. It also works for area. Are you trying to figure out what the footprint of that warehouse is? Are you trying to figure out how much area that buffer takes up for your category 1 stream? Now, it's not going to be that, it might not be that easy. You're going to have to futz with it. I've never actually done that, so it might take some experimenting. But it'll tell you right here, 6.79 acres. So how big is that pond? Anything. You can click on the different points and it'll spell it out. So if you take nothing else away from today, I think this is the thing you should take. There's tons of maps on there. They have a topo map, and this is free. They have a topo map. There's also an option where it will give you like Zillow, and it'll show you different properties that are for sale in the area. It's a great thing you should be playing around with and be familiar. New Jersey Preserve Farmland Web Map. This is also another great resource for determining if your property is preserved or not. Green is open space, brown is farmland, and this lighter color is, I think, that might not be a good example, but in application. What's good about this is that, I don't know if you can see it, but it outlines the exception areas for you. So here's 2 exceptions on this property, and here's 1 exception on this property. So again, if you're looking for your comp, you look at our SADC preserve farm list. It says there's a 2-acre severable exception. Oh, where is that? You can come to this map, look up by block and lot, and then it'll show you exactly where the exception area is. Also on this same website, New Jersey Preserve Farmland Web Map, it has highlands and pinelands. The colors didn't come out here very well, but it'll show you exactly where your property is. New Jersey Land Link. This is a great website because it shows farms that are for sale that are not listed with a realtor. So when the farmer wants to list his farm for sale by owner, they put it on here. So if you're looking for those listings that you need that are for your appraisal, you can try to come here. And it's easy. You just select your county, you put that in, you can choose map view, you can look at them as a list, but this is a great tool. The Highlands interactive map. If you're doing work in the Highlands, you need to know this, because if the municipality that you're working in has, let's say you're doing an appraisal of a farm, it's in the Pinelands, the Highlands, and it's in the planning area, and that municipality has opted in. You have to be careful about your minimum lot size requirement, because the zoning may say that it's 5 acres, but the septic compatibility might be such that they require as much as 13 acres. And the way you determine that is on this Highlands interactive map, and we have the link on our website. When you click on that interactive map, you search for your parcel by either address or by block and lot, either one. And then you go to this layers and you choose land use, land cover. And then you click this checkbox and you say create property report. And it's going to tell you what land use capability it has. So in this particular case, 10% was in the conservation zone and almost 90% was in the conservation environmentally constrained subzone. What do you do with this information? Now you go to the municipal zoning. You will look for a planning area, septic density. Now, this is one municipality, obviously, they, each municipality does their zoning slightly different. But you're looking for the septic density. And right here, it tells you conservation zone and subzones, 13 acres per septic system. So even though the zoning might be different, might be 5 acres, you want to make sure you're checking this. Earlier, I showed you about this beautiful map, and I told you it was free. You don't need any mapping program. If you go to Bing Maps, bingmaps.com, it operates very similar to Google, but the difference is you can have multiple data points, whereas Google doesn't do that. And you can even, there's an option where you can change out the text. I changed it to say Martin Farm and then the address, or maybe you don't want the name of the farm, maybe you just want the address, but you can tweak these and it makes a beautiful map for free. Very, very easy to use. The snipping tool, for those of you who are scanning a lot, and it's a cumbersome task, I'm not going to say this replaces all of scanning, but it replaces a lot. This entire presentation was done using the snipping tool. So it's very simple. You click on the scissors, you click and drag from top left to bottom right to select the area that you want. You copy it and you paste it. So all of these images that you've seen throughout the day, all of the mapping, everything, that was all done by copying and pasting. That's really what this tool is. It's just a copy and paste tool. It's also free. It's on your computer. You all have it and you may not even know it. If you don't know it, try it out, play with it because it's free and it really does a great job.
We've run a little long. Sorry about that. Thank you for coming. I just want to leave you with one thing. Jolyn and I were appraisers. We know what it's like to write a 100-page report, come up with a specific value, and have people criticize you. We know what it's like. We really appreciate the work you're providing. We have to certify within the 2 easement values that you give us. And we're very proud to do that on almost every report that we get in. And you're our connection to market value. You're like an umpire calling balls and strikes. Everybody boos the umpire. You take the umpire out, it's chaos. So thank you for what you do. I understand how hard it is. Thank you for your patience with our review letters. I've learned a lot from your responses. I really have.